Good morning, Ms. Mueller.
Good morning. Yes, good morning, Mr. Brown. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Good morning, Chairman Thornton.
Good morning. Who am I speaking with?
This is Carlos.
Carlos, how are you, my good friend?
Good, good.
Carlos, we go back a long ways, right?
We do. Back when I was still green around the whiskers, back in the early 2000.
Very gracious.
I think you appointed me to my first board in the region. Mayor Stoney?
Morning, everyone. How we doing?
Good, good.
How you doing?
I think I beat you again this morning, Mayor Stoney. You're slowing down. You get your aches and pains, you know. Get you about 2 minutes.
Well, good morning, all.
Good morning.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, Mr.
So,
Speaker.
Carlos, I'm rolling up on my 40th birthday, brother, so you know.
Hey, it's all downhill from there, bro. It's all down. You got a lot of good years. A lot of good years ahead of you.
Mr. Mayor, I hate to tell you, you're still a juvenile.
The 40th is coming up in 10 days, everyone. So, wow. I feel like this job has aged me 10 times that, but you know.
I do police work for 32 years, then we'll talk.
Do I get a beautiful haircut like yours, Kevin? If I did that for 32 years?
I'm sorry. Yeah, try doing police work for 32 years and see how it ages you. I used to have dark hair and more of it.
Well, you need to figure out what Chairman Thornton sips on in the morning, because he's not aged in 25 years. He looks exactly the same way he did.
We should all probably get a blood transfusion from him. It'd be a lot better.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. We are now live on YouTube, and I believe that you have a quorum.
All right. Well, I want to welcome everyone to the March Cvta Finance Committee meeting. It's such a pleasure to be joining everyone today. I know we still have we have a lot of work on our agenda today, or not a lot, but we got work to do. And so I won't prolong it. Let's get right down to our discussion. You have the statement of regarding virtual meetings already was provided to you by Mr. Parsons. Now I'll move forward to a roll call and certification of the quorum. Let's move forward, Ms. Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
I'm here.
Hanover County, Vice Chair Peterson.
I'm here too.
Henrico County, Mr. Thornton.
Here.
City of Richmond, Chair Stoney.
Here.
Commonwealth Transportation Board, Mr. Brown.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. And Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
All right. On item 1 on our agenda is the consideration of amendments to the action meeting agenda. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, is there? I will move that we vote to approve the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. No nays. The agenda is approved. Moving to item 2, the approval of the February 10, 2021 Cvta Finance Committee action meeting. Is there a motion to approve the Finance Committee meeting minutes as presented?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Ayes have it. The minutes are approved. Item 3, the open public comment period. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to offer comments via email or in person? Here in item 3.
Mr. Chair, we have not received any comments for this meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Mueller. Seeing there are no comments for the comment period, we will now move on to item 4 on the agenda. Item 4 on the agenda is the CVTA Finance Committee Chairman's Report. As I said earlier, I just want to say good morning and thank everyone for joining us today. I look forward to today's meeting, and there are a number of important items as we continue to build out CVTA that are before the board and the authority as well. And so I'm just ready to get started like everyone else. And so, as I said earlier, I will not prolong. We'll move further into the agenda. Item 5 of the agenda is the CVTA Activities Report. Ms. Heater and Mr. Parsons.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Before I turn it over to Mr. Ure to provide the CVTA TAC update, I wanted to give you a brief update on the project prioritization process. As you know, we've at the last full authority meeting, the authority took action on accepting the FY21 spending plans for projects in the region. We are working to update that process for FY22, and those spending plans have a couple different legs, and I'm working with Mr. Gregory and the TAC to make sure that the agreements are in place with each of the jurisdictions and Grtc, so that each jurisdiction can certify at the end of the year the expenditures that were made for transportation purposes. Those projects lead into the FY22 regional project prioritization process. We are working now at the staff level to fine-tune tools that will help the authority prioritize spending and priority projects for not just this year, but next year, and set up the last, I would call it the last component of what the code requires, which is a funding plan, and that is hand in hand with the spending plan, so that we can identify those projects that are priorities and are the most important, that will need to come back to the Finance Committee at some point for review. And we do have a subcommittee of the TAC that is now established, led by Chesterfield County and Hanover County, to develop those regional priorities. And I believe the time frame now is to have that finished by the first week or two of May. So I would expect for the Finance Committee to at least get an update on that at your May meeting, and a report on how things are progressing with regional priorities. Be happy to take any questions. Otherwise, we can turn it over to Mr. Ure for the TAC update. You may be muted, Mr. Mayor.
Any questions for Mr. Parsons? Okay, Mr. Ure.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I won't repeat what Chet said regarding the TAC agenda items that covered regional priority, project prioritization, or certification reporting. We did talk about those at Monday's meeting, which was March 8th. In addition, we had an update from Grtc on the regional public transportation plan, progress on that. There are a series of meetings next week with the study consultant and the member localities and agencies to start going through the recommendations of the study consultant on the public transportation plan. So as we vet through that, that will be coming back through to the full CBTA over the next month or two. And in addition, we had an update on the transit governance report progress. And as many on this call are aware, there are ongoing interviews from the study consultant for that effort, talking to the various stakeholders on transit governance. Otherwise, that's all I have to report, sir. I'm happy to take any questions.
Mr. Ure, I'll pose the question for you. I'd like to hear the progress you all are making. Just a few questions I had, and one of the questions was whether or not the regional transit plan aligns with some of the other policies and needs that can be found in the region. For example, affordable housing, things of that nature. Is there alignment there with other policies in the region as well?
Mr. Mayor, yes, sir. I think we'll find that the plan is pretty well thought out and comprehensive. It's using the transit vision plans phases 1 and 2 as kind of a starting point. Those plans, particularly the phase 2 plan, had a lot of regional input from the various localities. So I think we're going to find some pretty fully vetted plan. In addition, they're in the public outreach phase right now, so they are getting input from the public and from stakeholders beyond just the locality. So it will certainly a lot of opportunities for all interests to have input into the plan.
And questions for Mr. Ure?
Mr. Chairman, I did have a question as well.
Okay, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Ure, so as the TAC is thinking through the prioritization process, is it also been charged to think through kind of the next stage, the execution stage? For example, if we determined that we were going to have a prioritization process and that would produce projects that would exceed the annual funding allotment or allocation for regional initiatives, is there consideration about bond financing? Is that something that's being discussed with your group, or has that been thought to be deferred to the finance committee?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Yeah, the expectation of bonding we know is out there as an option. That's not something that the subcommittee is working on at the moment. We're really focusing on initially what the project eligibility looks like. What's the universe of projects that is appropriate to be funded through Cvta. We also have a heavy focus on opportunities to leverage funding through other funding sources, whether it be smart scale, even the local Cbta funds and other funding sources out there. So that's a common theme in our discussions thus far, is the ability to not exclusively fund projects through Cbta, but for leveraging. We're certainly aware of the bonding opportunity. I think seems like the consensus of the group at this point is bonding is maybe going to be off in our mid to longer term phase, and initially we want to make sure the funding gets established. We get credibility through the various bonding agencies and establish that track record before we go forward and start bonding things. So there's really been no time frame discussed on that, and certainly that will be a future item for discussion amongst the finance committee and the full Cbta. I don't know if Chet wants to chime in.
So one follow-up, Mr. Chairman, and I guess the reason I think this question is germane to the prioritization process is that, for example, as in the case with Smart Scale, funding impacts the prioritization or scoring process, and so I guess if what we're suggesting is that the prioritization will be determined based upon the need without regard to cost or available funding, then that's one thing. However, if the prioritization process will screen for the availability of funding or cost, then understanding what types of funding capacity exists will have a big impact on what types of projects could be executed. So I'll just commend that to your consideration, and we of course can follow up offline about that.
Yes, duly noted, sir. And obviously, one of the requirements through the legislation for the regional prioritization is cost benefit. So really, right now we're working on the eligibility piece. The next focus is on the benefit piece, which we'll be moving into the next meeting next week. We'll start that discussion. So basically, how do you score the projects based to determine the benefit, and then the cost piece, I guess, will probably kind of follow on towards the end of the discussion with the subcommittee. But certainly, that's an acknowledgement that we're aware of.
And one other item, Mr. Chair, following the Smart Scale Round 4 scoring, staff has been talking with VDOT about kind of an if-then study about if we were able to leverage X amount of dollars, a particular project may have moved up in the rankings, to assess what's a good dollar amount that leveraging would show benefit for our larger types of projects. So we're hopeful that may show some fruit in the future as we continue to have those discussions.
Any further questions for Mr. Year? Thank you, Mr. Year. I appreciate your work. We will now move on to the old business portion of our agenda. In the old business portion of our agenda, item 6 is the fiscal year 2022 revenue projections. For that presentation, we'll ask that Mr. Harris come forward. Mr. Harris.
He's going to take my seat.
Musical chairs.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Be very brief on the revenue projections. The finance working group, this is a topic that they've taken up over the last 30 days. We're starting to get, now that we are into the March distribution, where we've got enough data points where we feel like we can bring back to, tailoring into your previous conversation, we're going to start to do some projections for, whatever the relevant topic is. And we're going to need that 12 to 24 month forecast. So I think we've got enough data points now. I've got some folks in the Chesterfield finance area that are putting that together, and we're going to route that around to, primarily to the working group, make sure everybody is in agreement with those assumptions. And then I think that's something we'd like to bring back to you at your April meeting for this group to review. But I think that's going to be a vital component of the broader discussion that you've already, touched on this morning. So I think it was on this agenda just simply to give you an update that it is something that we are, keenly focused on. We'll use the next 30 days to make sure that all 9 localities are on board with the assumptions and those projections, and would like to put it on I think it's your April 14th agenda for y'all's review, and then wherever it goes from there is fine. But I did want to let you know that we are working on that diligently, but really couldn't do it until now. We haven't had enough, data points, particularly on the wholesale fuels, to really understand or give you any real insights as to where that might be going. So happy to take any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Harris? Seeing none, Mr. Harris, we look forward to the April meeting to hear back from you on FY 2022 revenue projections. Thank you so much. All right, we'll move forward on to item 7 on our agenda, Cvta Administrative and Operating Expense Budget, FY 2022. Ms. Heater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the second look at this particular worksheet for your fiscal year 2022 operating and administrative budget. This is a component of your planning for next fiscal year, obviously not the entire, as Mr. Harris mentioned, the revenue projections will be forthcoming as soon as we're able to have those data points collected. But I did want to share with you this morning, we're requesting your action to forward this to the full authority for action at the end of this month to schedule a public hearing with regard to the budget. This particular component of next fiscal year's planned expenditures is specific to the administrative and operating budget. I've given you a column that compares the current fiscal year approved budget for administrative and operating activities as compared to next fiscal year, with some notes off to the side, hopefully for clarification. It does assume a relatively stable next fiscal year to this fiscal year. A few, as you know, kind of missing pieces have been filled in relative to audit expenses, the banking fees and investment services. Obviously, those will be picking up next fiscal year as that activity increases, and gives you kind of a side-by-side comparison. Most of the other activities are remaining either as is. Insurance, of course, is also increasing based on the proration that we have this year, as far as next year being a full year of coverage. I'm happy to answer questions if you'd like to have any specific information provided, but this is an action item for you to consider today to forward to the full authority for a recommendation if you are willing to schedule a public hearing for the end of April. And I will just mention that that timeline is based on the financial management policies and procedures that were adopted that indicate that the authority will reach approval of their upcoming fiscal year budget by May 15th of each year.
Is there well, first, are there any questions for Ms. Heater?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mr.
Nova
Peterson.
Peterson here. I do have some questions. I realize we're looking at the 2022 budget, and this reflects properly based on continuing as we are. But I think there's a question by the time we get to the end of 2022, are we going to be looking at a different staffing arrangement than Plan RVA being our a contract with Plan RVA doing all our administrative work, or are we going to need to have something in the 2022 budget to start looking possibly for an executive director and staff and looking, I would think we would probably want to co-locate if we did, once we do put staff on, assuming we do, with Plan RVA and the TPO. But I don't see anything in here to even start the process in 2022, and I'm thinking maybe there should be.
Happy to incorporate any figures that you'd like. I think Mr. Peterson, if you're specifically referring to that recruitment line item, that might be a good place to start.
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, I think you're muted, Mr. Peterson.
Go ahead, Mr. Karen.
I don't necessarily disagree with Mr. Peterson's thought process on this, but I think it would be incumbent upon Plan RVA to let us know if there is in fact a staffing issue and what additional staff they would need to continue to provide the services for the Cvta. I don't necessarily think at this point that there's a necessity to hire an executive director as much more there may be a necessity to hire staff that could help with the day-to-day operations at a lower level. When we move forward later on down the road where we start managing bonds and such, that may change. And I still think we're probably 18 months, maybe to 2 years out from that happening. So I don't necessarily think it's necessary for this particular budget, but I think it is wise to look forward to what we may need in the future. And since Plan RVA is the company we're staffed with right now, I think we need to get some more information from them as to what they are going to need to complete their mission that they've been tasked with for the Cbta. Thank you.
Now, Ms. Here, tell me if I'm wrong right here, but while the fiscal year 2022 budget does not reflect any changes for personnel costs, hiring additional staff could come out of reserves for the contingency line item. Am I correct?
Yes, sir. Just as this year, that contingency line item is there for you to allocate to line items as you identify needs for the organization. That was the strategy that we took this year, you know, not knowing exactly how quickly we would be moving into some of these conversations. So that would be available to you, that $158,000 to allocate to this or any other types of activities budget. And I will mention that, you say the administrative staffing line item also, depending on what you choose to do with your staffing needs next fiscal year, may also be available depending on what obligations need to be filled with that.
And Mr. Chairman, just a point of inquiry. I understand that Mr. Peterson's point, but there would be no prohibition on the authority amending this budget if we were to determine that we needed to move at a more rapid pace to provide additional staffing to either the Plan RVA team or to move in a different direction. So I guess the question would be: would there be any impediment if we approve this budget as is, and then later determine for good reason that we need to move in a different direction? Would there be any impediment with our ability to amend this budget to accommodate that?
Mr. Brown, is that a question?
Well, I'm not sure who it's directed to. I guess it would be you, Ms. Heater, or maybe our council.
I'm happy to try to address that, Mr. Brown and Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Certainly, I would suggest that amending the budget is a possibility. Unlike local governments, there's no requirement in the statute that as to sort of the percentage of the amendment of the budget that would require an additional public hearing. For instance, in the case of local governments, it's typically that 1% of the annual budget trigger. If an amendment to the budget is going to be above 1%, then an additional public hearing is necessary. That kind of language is not in the Cvta statute. The Cvta statute only requires one public hearing and the collection of public input for the adoption of the budget. It doesn't speak to any later amendments to the budget and what that process might look like. But I believe that the body could amend its budget going forward. And I think it would be on a case-by-case basis whether the authority believed that it would be prudent to have another public hearing, but it's not required by statute for that process.
Mr. Chair,
And Mr. Carroll.
I think there might be a solution right in front of us on this page, and that is that if you look, there's quite a bit of unexpended funds from this past budget cycle. And my suggestion would be to take those unexpended funds and roll them into the reserve account for contingencies like this. Because the issue you have moving forward is that Mr. Brown is absolutely right that there's nothing that would prevent us from amending the budget in the future, except that if we turn around and accept everybody's transportation plans and say that we're going to spend these dollars for X, Y, and Z, we may have to change those allocations if we decide to amend the budget. But since we have this money that we didn't spend, we could hold in reserve. We could utilize it during midterm if we needed to hire staff as one-time monies and then work it into the next fiscal budget as an ongoing expense. And my suggestion would be is to take those unexpended funds, put them into the reserve account. We're going to make the account a little bit bigger, but we'll have the money available for us if we need to pivot in a different direction midstream. Just my suggestion.
Are there any comments on rolling over?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I think we did have conversations in the past, though, that at the end of the fiscal year, we were going to distribute funds back to the jurisdictions proportionately of leftover funds. So this would be a change in that policy. And I think that has to be part of the discussion. I really don't have a problem with putting that 15,000 back into recruitment just as a stopgap. We may or may not use it, as we didn't use it this past year. But it gives us an option, a starting place, if we choose to recruit new help for Chet and Martha, or separate help for the Cvta directly.
Are there any comments, any further comments on the budget?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Eric.
Sorry to interrupt. Under the statute, in addition to the admin and operating costs, the annual funding plans from the member agencies and localities are part of that. So it would be prudent for the body to convey the expectation that those funding plans are submitted by those by the local jurisdictions and the member agencies, so that that can be built into that process. Mr. Mayor, I believe, Mr.
Are you suggesting some sort of action that you think this committee should take on that front?
I would suggest that perhaps the Finance Committee simply ask staff to convey their request that the local jurisdictions and member agencies prepare to submit their funding plans for the FY22 as soon as possible.
Mr. Chairman, I know we need to take some action here. I would like to suggest, I'll put it in the form of a motion if you like, that we move 15,000 from reserves for contingency up to recruitment and still maintain the 500,000 and recommend it to the full Cvta.
There's an motion on the floor from Mr. Peterson. Is there a second?
Second that.
Mr. Brown is seconded. We will, Ms. Mueller, I call the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Hanover County, Vice Chair Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Mr. Thornton.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Chair Stoney.
Aye.
NCTB, Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for item number 7.
The motion is approved. Is there a motion to forward the draft fiscal year 22 Cvta administrative and operating expense budget to the full authority in order to schedule a public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
There is a motion, and is there a second?
Second.
It has been seconded. Ms. Mueller.
Thank you. Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Sorry, can you repeat the motion, please?
The motion is to forward the budget to the Cvta with a recommendation for a public hearing.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Hanover County, Vice Chair Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Mr. Thornton.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Chair Stoney.
Aye.
And CTB, Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call.
Thank you, Ms. Mueller. We will now move on to the new business portion of our agenda. First up in the new business portion, item 8 is the draft memorandum of agreement with GRTC. Ms. Heater, I believe you have a presentation for us.
Actually, I think that's me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Parsons.
Ms. Gregory.
I'm sorry, I can't. I'm going back and forth between.
Screens are bouncing back
your
and forth.
voice is down for the most part, but it got me on that one. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Mr. Gregory.
No problem. So what you have before you is the, and on screen there is the draft memorandum of agreement between the Cvta and GRTC regarding distribution and use of their 15% designated funds under the Cvta Act. This is a draft agreement. Happy to take your input. It's only for discussion purposes this morning, but wanted to update the Finance Committee on the status of this draft agreement. The draft agreement is a shared product between Plan RVA and Cvta staff and GRTC. I believe Julie, Tim, and Mr. Zinzarella are in the meeting and can address it if they wish or if there are questions for them. We all appreciate their input in preparing this draft. In addition to their input, we wanted to have a 360 degree awareness and opportunity for input from all the jurisdictions. So this draft has been distributed to local legal counsel, and I have received input from them, non-substantive input about just streamlining some things and non-substantive suggestions on language and that kind of thing. And that's important because it's our view that this draft agreement will serve as a template for the MOAs between the Cvta and the member jurisdictions. So that's why another reason why we wanted to have a 360 degree opportunity for input there and review. In addition to that layer of review and input, it was shared with the TAC the CVTA TAC as well, just to give them an update on its status and provide an opportunity for review and consideration, and so that they had the same information that their local legal counsel had and could confer accordingly. So we will be taking your input and direction on this today and your discussion. We'll, if there are suggestions that we can, or changes that we need to make, we'll make those. We'll confer again with GRTC. I'll take the input from the local legal counsel, and then we'll make some revisions to this draft, and we'll be back before you at your next meeting, hopefully with a recommendation for approval at that time. Happy to take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions for Mr. Gregory? Are there any comments on the draft memorandum of agreement with the GRTC? Well, before we close out this this agenda item, I wanted to provide some comments on behalf of the city of Richmond. And while the intent for this agenda item was to review and provide comments, I think it's also important for us to just stop real quick and rethink how this committee intends to treat GRTC compared to other localities and a number of processes as well. As this MOA is a template or a draft document that is being considered to be used not only by the GRTC, but by other localities. And none of the other localities or entities have signed or come to a consensus on the MOA language. It would be my recommendation that the GRTC, along with our localities, work together simultaneously to critique and firm up the language in the MOA regarding distribution of the use of the Cvta funds. Now, there is no need for GRTC to sign the MOA, and then there are substantial changes from the localities. All parties should be involved and they should be working together. One of the ways we can potentially close this gap is to have GRTC's CFO added to the finance working group so that he is involved and aware of the developments from this committee. Lastly, this brings me to the timeline for the release of the 15% set-aside funds. It would be my recommendation, and in line with the full body's approval back in October, to set up a process for which we distribute GRTC's funds through the same distribution process as localities. GRTC has set up the special fund to receive the funds back in October. The board approved or allocated $200,000 of GRT's distribution to be spent on regional transportation plan. As it is the job of this committee to distribute funds, bringing GRTC in line with the distribution process is my recommendation. Does anyone have any further questions or comments?
So, Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, are you suggesting that well, I guess there's no action being asked to be taken on this document today.
Nope.
Is this just for advice and information to the TAC and other parties, or is there any action you're asking us to take today?
Well, I'm asking for the CFO at GRTC to be included in our finance working group so they can be aware of the work of the body, but also the work of the committee as well. And also, I'm saying that we need to move forward with the distribution of those funds, the $200,000 to GRTC as well as soon as possible.
So are you asking that we take action to move that issue, or do you think that can be done? Well,
I believe that should already
seem like it might require action.
I believe it's an administrative issue, Mr. Brown.
You think so?
Anything.
Does anyone disagree with that? I'll defer if that's the case.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm a little confused. I was assuming that the GRTC was in the distribution the same as the rest of the jurisdictions already.
I don't believe
apparently that's not the case.
I don't believe that's the case, Mr. Peters.
So is that direction to Ms. Heater then that I'm trying to figure out who we're telling to do this.
Yes, sir. We had instruction previously to move the jurisdictional distributions. And so I think by virtue of this discussion that the mayor has opened, that is the instruction that we need at the staff level to move the disbursements of the GRTC funds.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Carroll.
I thought the reason that the money was not released as of yet to the GRTC is because of the review of the governance documents into transportation. I thought that is the reason why that money had not been shifted yet. I think that was the something that was brought up in the full committee. So I think that's why they're in the situation that they're in right now. That's why the $200,000 was put up front. And so I think that when those other documents are done and ready for approval, I think that's when that money will be moved. I thought that's what the committee had decided. Perhaps legal counsel can add to that.
Yeah, Mr. Gregory can add to that, but I believe that the legislation doesn't prohibit the distribution of the funds. It just can only spend up to $200,000. I could be wrong, but Mr. Gregory will obviously opine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, you are correct. The legislation, the statute does not prohibit or any way limit the distribution to GRTC, and that can continue. I believe also that, however, Mr. Carroll is correct that there were some limitations or a check maybe perhaps put on the distribution of GRTC funds. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that's the case only because there is that deliverable of the regional transportation, regional public transportation plan that is expected. So I think there was let's wait and get that deliverable and then distribute the funds, but that's not in the statute. That's not required by law. So that was certainly just a policy decision, I believe, or a policy position that was just expressed by the body. But if the body wishes to go ahead and distribute those funds at this time with that work in progress, and I believe it's being resolved fairly soon, you can certainly do that.
Ms. Peter, tell me about what next steps may be.
Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Carroll?
I guess my question would be the GRTC, where are they at in their budget? Where are they at financially? Is it a situation that they absolutely need the money right now? My understanding, we're talking with my representatives, that they're also getting COVID dollars coming in that are helping them to fund their operation. But it would be helpful to have a report from them where they are fiscally to determine whether or not it's imperative that we change what the policy has been in place already. I'm not trying to hold money away from them, but I thought that it was the collective thought of the full committee for them to get these other documents in place first before those funds were released.
Mr. Chairman, it is, I believe, asked to provide a response. Am I recommended to provide that response?
I'm sorry, that was inaudible, I have to say. Can we repeat that?
Can I be heard better now?
Okay, Julie, here you go. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I was asking to be recognized to respond.
Yep, Ms. Tim.
Thank you. The finances of GRTC right now are being stabilized by the use of federal stimulus funds for the CARES Act and the secondary stimulus. And we hope, of course, that our funds will be stabilized next year through the third stimulus that's being considered right now at the federal level. However, the process of receiving the funds from Cbta, I believe, is a separate matter than the financial stability of the CARES Act money. The money that comes to Cbta is defined through legislation and through the state legislation to be dispersed similar to the disbursements that are going on with the localities. The funding as we move forward to be able to use the Cbta money in FY22 is going to be imperative that those funds are in our accounts when the plan is approved to start spending. By law, we cannot spend the money prior to having the plan approved, we did have a plan approved through this body for the FY21 funds. And that plan included $200,000 for the development of the FY22 plan, as well as the remainder of the fund being placed in reserve until more detailed plan was developed. So the entire plan for FY21 was submitted to the board. I believe it was approved, or at least a portion of the 200,000. We are in the process of developing the plan for FY22. That will go to our board in the next couple of months. It will go to this board. However, I believe it should be in place before the beginning of the fiscal year. Unlike project money, we will need the money in July 1 of this year to be able to use to complete services and prevent a disruption. Unlike project money that can be delayed without any disruption, that's not where we are. If for some reason there is a delay in developing this plan every year, we have had a discussion with Martha and Eric and Chet that it would be my intention to come forward and ask for a continuing resolution to allow for interim spending until that plan is formally approved in order to prevent the disruption of transit services in the region. We have already received a reduction of funding from our local partners in anticipation of Cvta funds being received, and we need to receive those funds per the legislation. If that didn't answer the question, I'd be happy to provide more information.
Well, I think, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I think what we're discussing is whether or not Ms. Heater can take notice of the request made by the mayor and supplemented by the comments of Ms. Timms, or whether or not there's any objection to that. And I guess so Ms. Timms, what I'd like to avoid doing is if everybody agrees that we should give you the money, then I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I want to go back. I'd like to hear whether Mr. Carroll is objecting to that allocation or not.
Mr. Carroll?
The point that I was bringing up is that there was a decision made by the full body to hold off on doing that until those other documents were finished. I have no problem with putting it forward to the full body for consideration if that's what the will of the Finance Committee is. But I believe it was the full body that made that decision, and I think that's where it needs to be determined, unless someone can tell me something different.
Mr. Chairman.
I was gonna ask for Mr. Gregory's opinion first, Mr. Peterson, before moving.
Unfortunately, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I don't recall exactly if the full body made that decision firmly by motion or resolution. So we'd have to look into that, look at the minutes to make that determination. Again, I believe if it's the will of the body to distribute those funds, then that can be done. Certainly, there's no limitation on that under the statute. But I can't recall offhand if that was a position taken by the full body.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that, Mr. Gregory, were there any prohibitions in the statute for the distribution? And what we're looking for is just, distribution of these funds as we do with the localities as well.
No, sir. There's no limitation on that. The only difference being, again, is that the deliverable of the regional public transportation plan that the localities don't have, but absolutely not. There's no limitation on the distribution of funds to GRTC.
Okay, Mr. Peterson, thank you, Mr. Gregory.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I get the feeling from what Ms. Tim has told us, though, that everything is on track, that this funds will be in place, and she still can't spend them until this deliverable is presented anyway. And we have a full meeting of the board coming up on the 26th. If the full board wants to make that adjustment, I'm not going to have a problem with that, knowing that the deliverable still has to be in place before those funds can be expended. But I agree with Mr. Carroll that this was a determination by the full body and probably needs to be determined by them again.
Yeah, I think there was something in the chat, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Parsons just pointed out that it does appear that the full authority approved the use of up to $200,000 by GRTC back in October. And I guess, I guess what I would just suggest for the body's consideration is, we don't want to put additional hurdles in place other than what we've put in place. And I think what I'm hearing collectively from Ms. Timms and Mr. Parson, and I think where the chairman was going is that we kind of did decide this already, in which case we shouldn't impose an additional criteria, whether it be waiting for the full body's meeting at the end of the month or what have you, if the action's already been taken. Is that your request, Mr. Mayor? Or you're on mute, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, you're on mute. Were you saying something?
Oh, no, I wasn't.
Okay.
Something, yeah.
So I guess my question is, do we need to take a vote to clarify whether we're going to do what we said we're going to do in October, or whether we're going to wait until the end of the month or what have you? But it seems to me like, based on Mr. Parsons' findings, that we are actually already decided this, and we agreed that we would allocate the $200,000 to them.
Mr. Mayor.
My reading as well, Mr. Brown, that, I don't recall any, explicit policy being set by the authority. I just, as Mr. Parsons cited for us, the October 30th meeting, the action was, funds up to $200,000. And I think administratively, that's exactly what we should be doing as well. And maybe we'll just go ahead and if we need to, Mr. Gregory, to take a vote on this action, maybe we should do that.
Yeah.
I'll entertain a motion to do so momentarily, but I believe, Mr. Thornton, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that most of this is for basically information, and I don't know whether or not that we need to be compelled to vote on something like this today. It was an item for action. It's more informational. And so I think it's always good to reflect on all of this. And I think that things are in the right place for us to do, make sure that everything's going to be done appropriately. So I always think that let's be a little prudent and acting on these things so fast.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carroll.
Actually, I mean, I agree. And I will say this, that based on the text in the chat, I'm not sure why we haven't released the $200,000 to them already. Right?
Well, I think
that should have been done already, and that doesn't require a motion. That doesn't require any action from us to do. That should have been done already. So I have no problem at all moving forward with moving that. The bigger discussion we were having is, it was limited to $200,000, and we weren't releasing all of the money. So I agree, this money should be released to them immediately. It should have, as soon as $200,000 was in their account, they should have gotten it already based on the action we took in October. And then moving forward, when we come to full committee, we can decide, make sure we get it as an agenda item and decide if we want to release everything, providing that, the spending plans for the future budget are provided by GRTC. And also, remember now, they're also going to get probably an infusion of what money is already sitting there, which has not been accounted for. And perhaps they'll have some great suggestions as to what they can utilize those funds for as well for us.
It sounds like, Mr. Carroll, that we have consensus that the 200,000 that was approved for usage up to 200,000 back in October should be distributed as soon as possible. I don't see any objection from anyone on that front. And therefore, now we circle back to where we were in the beginning. Administratively, we should get that moving as quickly as possible. I think everyone is on the same page on that front. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would say that I would have thought that already would have been done. So if the point of this was to make sure that that 200,000 gets to them, I agree with you 100%. I would have assumed they already got it.
Yep, that's the gist right there. So Ms. Heater or Mr. Parsons, what do we need to do to ensure that 200,000 does get moved?
The committee doesn't need to do anything. We'll
That's right.
initiate that request with the Chesterfield County staff today. I think I just would like some clarification on how we should proceed with the balance of the collected funds thus far and the receipts going forward for the balance of that 15%.
Right. Any other comments from anyone? The other larger discussion that we sort of touched on today, and maybe we should be able to have that discussion with the full authority at a future meeting. But today, and today only, I think we're talking about the 200,000. So I appreciate everyone indulging me on the topic, and I won't hold us up any further. Any further questions? We're good? All right, let's move on to the next part of our agenda. It is the item 9, the financial advisory services related to regional project fund investment. For this, I believe we have the Chesterfield team for comments on this topic. Ms. Longacre.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, all. I see you have my memo in your packet. What I am proposing is that the banking and investment fiscal agent that Chesterfield County handle CBTA's investments in-house like we handle the counties and always have. We do have a team of professionals, brokers, guidance to help us, but we make the decisions in-house because the market moves quickly and we need to be able to act. I am going to open up accounts for LGIP and VIP to invest in available funds, but I will leave a portion of it in the bank, although the bank doesn't pay interest. We get a rate of return by investing in LGIP or VIP. Once we have a clearer picture of projects, cash flow needs, and a better environment for investing, I can begin then to invest in more longer-term investment instruments for us. And as I included a copy of our report, you'd be getting one monthly, the same for Cvta. And I would be available for any questions you have.
Just a quick information. Are the investments principally and fixed income?
I'm not hearing you very well, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, Mr. Brown, you're going in and out here a little bit. Can you?
My question was, are the investments principally in fixed income securities? Is that principally where we are with those investments?
Well, currently they're all sitting at the bank. And again, the funds are all in the bank. And again, the bank does not pay interest. It offsets expenses. LGIP and VIP would be mutual funds and that they invest in, and they are the most liquid I can invest in. 10 o'clock today, I have the money in your account, back in the account if needed. And I think I included that it was like 0.1%, 0.12% is what the rates are right now, but that's the rates everywhere. But it will at least get us that rate of return. Fixed income will come once we have better projections and a better environment. There's nothing out there right now to purchase.
Okay.
Any further questions or comments? Ms. Longacre, thank you so much. Seeing no comments or any questions, we'll continue on with the agenda. Thank you. We'll now move into item 10 of the Cvta staffing and support services. We are set to receive comments and a presentation from Ms. Heater. Ms. Heater?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, members of the committee. We, I think, put this item on the agenda today as a follow-up from last month's committee meeting. And Mr. Mayor, your specific comments at the end of the meeting about topics you'd like to see coming forward. This document is largely unchanged from what was included in the February full authority meeting packet, so it should look familiar to you. I think we updated one of the activities from underway to complete, and that was just updated here. But for the most part, the performance requirements, and these two sheets are the two appendices of the MOU that we have in place for support services for this fiscal year. We've given a status update of the activities that have been undertaken and where we are relative to completion. The remaining underway items, I can just give you kind of a brief update on the coordination with Auditor of Public Accounts. We are in process with that solicitation process. The RFP was released by the Auditor of Public Accounts. Sheila White from the City of Richmond and I sit on the committee alongside representatives from the HR TAC to select the qualified firms for that. We conducted interviews actually yesterday, and we'll be proceeding with the negotiation process over the coming week. With regard to the regional project prioritization, Mr. Parsons already gave the update on that effort, so you already know where we are there. Obviously, the regional public transportation plan and the transit service governance reports are also underway, as you've already heard. So all activities are moving forward, and we are set to be able to complete the milestones set for us for this fiscal year on time. The performance indicators, as you know, were a little bit vague this year, just simply because we were setting up systems, and I think next year we'll be able to dive deeper into the measurement of those systems. But we have been able to give you kind of a status update on each of the performance indicators on project management, financial management, and the staffing of the bodies associated with the authority. So, I just wanted to be able to extend my thanks and appreciation first to our staff for the work that they've done, Nicole and Chet. This year, I have appreciated the opportunity that you all have given to give that acknowledgement over the last several meetings. So thank you for that. But also wanted to say thank you to the members of the authority for the opportunity for Plan RVA to provide these support services. We continue to stand ready to support you in any way that you think is appropriate going into fiscal year 2022. We're happy to have discussions with you about engaging in a continuation of support services. And I think we're open to entertaining various options for what that could look like. Mr. Peterson and Mr. Carroll, I think, brought this up a little bit earlier in the conversation today about our staff capacity and ability to perform. I think in particular, the questions that Mr. Brown has raised about the long-term intentions of the authority and how it will operate and choose to fund projects largely will dictate what your staffing needs will be in the mid to long term. Heading into fiscal year 2022, I think we are positioned to continue to provide staff support to you for administration and kind of back office. In order to do that, we would look to change our staffing assignments. Ms. Mueller and Mr. Parsons are committed to other obligations in the coming fiscal year. And so I do think that it would be prudent, in order to maintain an adequate level of service to you, that we would look to bring new staff capacity on. And I think the major discussion with you would be, what support needs do you have? And is it, as suggested, more of an administrative function, or is it that more senior level, what I would refer to as perhaps strategic, as you move into the next phase of operation? So I think we can provide either or both to you. How we structure that support needs to be in partnership with the authority, guided by your needs and your expectations. We can simply be a contracted entity. You could be as involved as you'd want in the selection of personnel for the work that we would be providing to you. I will share, probably Mr. Peterson is most familiar, but when we went through the process with the MPO now 2 years ago, the MPO Executive Committee was an active and involved participant in the recruitment process for our Director of Transportation as the lead staff member to the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization. Plan RVA is the employer, but we coordinated very heavily with the member jurisdictions, the MPO and the Policy Board Executive Committee for that recruitment process. So, we're open to engaging however you think makes the most sense. But I would say that if the authority is interested in entertaining an extension of the existing MOU or another similar MOU for next fiscal year, we would look to bring on additional staff support to our personnel to provide the administrative support functions that you're familiar with from Ms. Mueller, executive support functions, I would say, from Mr. Parsons, not to say that they would completely go away, but I think we need to be able to bring additional capacity and bandwidth to meet your needs. I'll stop there, and maybe there's opportunity, Mr. Chair, for discussion on this topic.
Yes, thanks, Ms. Heater. We'll now entertain any comments, discussion, or questions for Ms. Heater on this topic. Are there any from the members?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carroll.
Not that I disagree with anything that was said. I think it's probably going to be essential that some additional staff will be put on. I guess the next question will be, what's that going to look like for the budget? What's the cost? That's really what we would need to bring forward to the full committee for consideration when we look at renewing the MOU with Plan RVA. So, and I'm sure they'll have that information ready for us when the time comes.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Any further comments from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Heater, for that update and report. We appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, would it be both helpful to bring to the April committee a proposal of what our staff support structure could look like and what the timeline for recruitment would be? And would you like us to limit that to a similar level of service that we're providing today insofar as administrative staff support to the committees and I'll say shepherding of the business of the body? Or are you interested in more substantial staffing at that executive level at this time?
I think the latter would be, the first. The first would be something I think that we should at least all take a review of when you all are able to put that together for the committee.
Okay, happy to do that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Will this affect the budget that we're sending forward to the full committee?
My approach will be to give you our presentation within the bounds of the budget that you've advanced, the administrative and operating budget that you've advanced to the authority.
Thank you.
Any further comments for any questions for Ms. Heater? Ms. Heater, do you have anything further? Okay, moving on to the other business portion of our agenda, future meeting topics on item 11. Are there any future meeting topics anyone on the committee would like us to explore and consider as we move forward as the Finance Committee of the Cvta?
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think we do need to have a more robust conversation around the execution of projects. And I'm going back to this issue of the bonding concept. And I'll just for a couple of seconds kind of explain why. I think as many of the folks on the Zoom are aware, there are a number of large pent-up projects that the region has been contemplating for a while. And the one thing we do know is that those projects can't be executed kind of on a pay-as-you-go basis unless we are willing to only execute one project, per really 4 or 5 year cycle at a time. And so I think we have to, if we follow the models of our HR TAC and of MBTCA, along with their agreement on the prioritization, there was also an agreement that the way you're going to execute this prioritization and move a number of these projects forward is through a bonding process. And so I think we just need to get some clarity on that expectation, so that we can inform Mr. Uri's process as well. So, so at some subsequent meeting, I think we need to have that discussion, and maybe seek to have someone come in and share with us, how do you optimize that?
I think that would be appropriate, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Carroll.
I don't disagree, Mr. Brown. I just think it's going to be some time down the road before we establish our financial portfolio. And it would be wise for us to have whoever our financial advisor is, when that comes forward, to come before the committee, so we can have a more robust discussion about how that would look. Because part of what we talked about earlier in the meeting was the ability to show by code that the cost benefit analysis. And when you look at how cheap money is, when you talk about in the bonding side, from a cost benefit analysis portion, if we could fund some of these projects sooner than later, it would cost us less money in the long run. But that's something that a fiscal advisor needs to come in, I think, and provide us with that information. And I've been talking with staff here. Unfortunately, I think it's going to take more time for us to establish the stable funding, so to speak, as to what it's going to look like to project it out over long term. Doesn't mean we shouldn't start having the conversation. Doesn't mean we shouldn't bring the financial advisor in, so that when we have that ability and we have the established credit, so to speak, we can look at moving it forward. So, I don't think that is a bad recommendation at all for us to. I just don't know how quickly we'll be able to do any of that based on how long it may take to establish that credit.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think Mr. Carroll and I are involved in agreement, and I think as he's obviously had some conversations to understand that I think what I'm suggesting is that the rest of us have the benefit of that perspective. But I agree, Mr. Carroll, that it may not be that it's something that's in the near term, but I think just educating ourselves about that so that we can properly educate the various constituencies that we're working with. It'd be helpful for us to know that. So I'll defer to you and Mr. Parsons and Ms. Eater to determine who should be those, who should come and share with us at some subsequent meeting. But thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Thornton.
Yeah, I was reflecting on as chair of the Cbta at this point in time. It may be efficacious if we think about discussing in the future flexibility. Localities have started receiving allocations now. And so one of the things we may need to look at is making sure that we're going to use a flexibility approach if we chose to do that. And one of the concerns that I have, and that is, and you've heard me mention this before, about some of the differences in the localities, the small ones and the larger ones. But I think this whole idea of flexibility can be helpful, perhaps, but at least probably I'm just suggesting as a discussion as we move ahead, so that all members would feel that they're in the game, and that's important, I think. So I just want to share that thought with you and all our members.
Thank you, Mr. Thornton. Any other further comments on future topics? Just a thought, I think it may not be bad for the committee to consider that we charge the finance director's work group to prepare a presentation or some recommendations on this subject as well. And I also wouldn't be bad for the fiscal agent to do the same also before the committee in future meetings. So as Mr. Brown said, we all are privy to some of the same information and can have a good idea what the landscape looks like. Any other comments? Do the CVTA Finance Committee members have any comments of their own at the moment? Not specific to meeting topics.
Mr. Chair, if I may say again, I think it was a great meeting, well run. Happy early birthday. It only gets better from here.
Ms. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. I love to take the advice of a seasoned gentleman like yourself. I appreciate that.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Thornton.
as we would say, since it's your birthday, bon anniversaire. Happy birthday.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to take a moment just to, my comment is, Mr. Thornton, as you prepare for the full body meeting that we have upcoming, that there are some topics that we discussed today that you may want to consider for the larger body conversation and agenda. One, the GRTC distribution subject that we talked about today. And then number two, we may want to consider discussing, the further need for an executive director or a CFO, as well as a larger body discussion as well. So just some items for you, Mr. Thornton, to consider for a future agenda. Any other comments from the members?
Simply happy birthday, Mr. Mayor. And as Mr. Carroll said, it only gets better from here, but the aches get more multiplied too.
Now, I mean, a lot of people told me now the 40 is the new 30. So I'm looking forward to another 10 years of being 30 something. Okay. All right, folks, that is all we have on our agenda today. The next meeting is April 14th, 2021. Looking forward to seeing everybody there virtually right now. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.